Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I'm Tim Kaladz. I'm a reporter with the Globe and Mail and a streetwise columnist. Typically, I cover finance for the Globe, but in the last 2 years, I've become more and more fascinated and engaged with the idea of how we live now, how we work now, as I think all of us are. And so our event today is Redefining Work. It's employee health and happiness in the changed economy. And before we get started, I want to acknowledge that the land on which the Globe and Mail is situated is the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, the Métis First Nation, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Today's event is made possible by the Telfer School of Management, and we're happy to have a speaker from Telfer here today, along with others who are joining independently. We aren't anticipating any technical issues. But as always, as we've all learned through this all, we appreciate your patience if they do arise. If you need any technical help, there should be a help desk icon in the bottom of your screen. And if you have a question for the speakers, please use the Q&A box on the right. And I'll be taking some of your questions at the end, so get them in and I will try to address as many as possible. So today we're talking about an important topic, happiness at work. And I know that has been thrown around quite a lot lately. I know we hear a lot of terms like wellness and happiness, and we're really trying to dig into what that really means because it can become a bit buzzwordy. I'll be the first to admit that. And the reason why we're doing it is because I think we can all agree that the last 2 years have been pretty challenging, and those who have been able to work from home have navigated isolation and the challenges of juggling family care. I personally had a baby born 3 weeks before the first lockdown, so I have been through it all. And of course, many Canadians worked on the front lines throughout the pandemic. So we're really trying to kind of hit the whole spectrum, the whole array of workers in the workplace. And all the challenges that have related to employee mental health and engagement that existed before the pandemic have only sharpened. At the same time, businesses in all sectors are experiencing a talent shortage. I recently interviewed the retiring head of RBC's HR department, and she's been in the business for I think 30 plus years, if I remember correctly. And she said she's never seen it as tough as it is right now. So it just ain't getting easier, and that's why we got to talk about it. So we've got an excellent group here today to talk about these issues, along with how we can address them. So the way it's going to work is I'm going to start with a brief interview. That's one-on-one for about 10 minutes. And then we'll move to our panel and have a panel discussion. So my first guest today is Louise Taylor-Green. She's the retired CEO of the Human Resources Professionals Association, or the HRPA. Louise is now a management consultant, educator, and leadership coach. So Louise, I think you should be in the room.
Hi, Tim.
There you go. Hey there. All right. So, you and I obviously had a brief chat before this started. And what I'm really trying to get into is the underlying issues at play here, effectively, because, we tend to hear about topical stuff like returning to the office. That's the very sexy topic right now. But there's a lot of kind of deep-rooted stuff in there that I don't think people really acknowledge. So to your mind, based upon all your experience and what your research and everybody you talk to, what is really going on right now? What are workers and management and fighting over, and where does that tension stem from?
Well, I really appreciate the sort of overarching higher order question, because it would be very easy to be seduced into the concept of just figuring out how we deal with what's going on in the office or in remote work. But the reality that we're facing right now is this is a fundamental and profound resetting and renegotiation of the psychological and actual contract around work. What was is not what is, and is not what will be. And so what we see more than anything right now are some of these struggles around agency and ambiguity. So employees are really looking for the opportunity to reclaim a sense of control over some dimensions of their work and home life. And they also want clarity over what the rules of engagement are going to be in the workplace or in remote work. And so we know that uncertainty in the workplace is really the biggest threat to engagement and strong cultures.
Yeah, there's something I'll never forget. A little over a year ago, I was part of a big feature at the Globe that was actually one of our top stories last year. And the headline was effectively "Working from Home is Causing Breakdowns." And the whole point of the piece was that a lot of white collar workers, including myself, felt like they didn't have the right to kind of speak about their frustrations because, a lot of people were on the front lines and dealing with much worse kind of day to day. But it was the first time that we kind of put the idea out there that, people even working from home are struggling, and it's okay to say you're struggling. And one of the ways that it was framed to me in terms of kind of what was really going on in our minds almost is that in times of chaos, what we seek, what we cling to is control. The human brain doesn't effectively handle chaos very, very well. And so given that this is partly a psychological phenomenon on some level, what can leaders do? I think that's at the end of the day what a lot of people listening today probably want to know, because there, to my mind, isn't a very easy, quick fix.
You're absolutely right. There is no quick fix. And the reality for workers is they actually have a lot of choice right now. And you mentioned that you'd interviewed Helena from RBC, and I agree with her completely that we've actually never seen such a fundamental power shift in the labor market as we're seeing right now. And so what leaders really need to be thinking about is not just returning people to an office or to a workplace or implementing a new operating model, but more than anything, it's about rebuilding trust and rebuilding relationships. The people who left your organization 2 years ago at the beginning of the pandemic have seen such significant change in their personal lives and in their values. People have experienced loss and change, and they're still grappling with it. And in the organizations that had no alternative but to furlough or lay off some of their employees, there's a tremendous amount of unresolved resentment and hostility towards employers. And there will need to be significant investments in restorative practices that welcome employees back to the workplace. We need to reorient them. Organizations cannot assume that they don't need to re-onboard people to the organization because the business strategy has shifted, the economic climate has changed, and customer expectations have changed. And so they are going to have brand new colleagues they've never worked with before, they don't have any relationships with, and they need to rebuild trust and relationship. And I think this is an amazing opportunity, one that employers have probably never had before, to really do over some of your workplace practices and do them better and really attend to this sense of worker well-being. There were some recent publications from Josh Burson that talked about the significance of mental health issues and burnout in the workplace. And I don't even think we've seen the tip of the iceberg yet. And so layering on all of the changes that employees are going to face when their employers start asking them to come back into the workplace is going to require a very significant investment in relationship development, not making any assumptions about what the employee's experience or perspectives are, and really leading from a place of trust and authenticity.
One of the analogies I keep telling myself, because I've also had to kind of realize that, our brains have shifted. We're not in the pre-pandemic mode anymore. It's gone on for long enough that almost think the neural pathways have changed. What I keep reminding myself of is, I have played a lot of sports in my life, had a lot of injuries. And as I've gotten older, a physiotherapist once told me, once you sit in an office chair every day for a few years, your muscle structure actually changes, particularly in your hips, and on one hand, it's quite obvious. But I feel like what has happened in the pandemic is a muscle structure change in our brains to some extent. And there's probably, this is personal opinion here, but there's probably a lot of just hoping that we can just kind of pick up where we left off and return back to the way it was. On that front, there's been a lot of focus on kind of returning to the office, as if the office is kind of this grand place where everything will reset, at least on some level. In your opinion, what's missing with that way of thinking?
Oh, it would be a tragic mistake for organizations to assume that returning people to a physical workplace is like a utility where you flick a switch and all of a sudden things are going to go back to the way they were. There is never going to be a going back to the way that it was. Pieces of the previous work culture, work climate, work environment, they will be restored. And hopefully they'll be restored better and more inclusive and a greater sense of trust for workers. But I think it would be a tremendous mistake for any employer not to really think about this as an opportunity to really ask employees how they're doing and what matters to them now. And as you were talking about sort of the neural structure of the brain, the education work that I do is actually on positive neuroplasticity. And so one of the things that I know for sure is that we all have the power to rewire our brains and build new neural pathways. But employers have a really significant role to play in burnout prevention and total employee well-being. If they have stress or distress at home, which is likely exacerbated with still so much uncertainty in these times, we actually have to make sure that the employer is taking the leadership role in helping employees examine and evaluate their total well-being. Mental health and burnout is going to be the next most significant epidemic that workplaces face. And while there's a lot of lip service going on in workplaces today about what we're doing to take care of our employees, there's not a lot of tangible action that's happening in a way that will be customized and lead to durable positive change in the workplace.
To your one thing you said there that is another analogy I've drawn, and I'm saying this partly to kind of help convince people, so to speak, which may sound a bit crazy, but the reason why I'm saying this is because when you cover this space, when you talk to a lot of HR folks doing reporting or whatever, there seems to be this general, I don't want to say groupthink, but everyone seems to get it. There's a lot of buzzwords thrown around and people are like, we need to invest in employee well-being, et cetera. And then I talk to my friends and, they work all in various jobs, sales, finance, my sister's a nurse, et cetera. So there's all these different types of workplaces. And I've realized that there's still so much that has to cut through, or a lot still isn't getting through, and particularly in large organizations. And so what I've realized, having a kind of a specialty in economics or finance, is that recessions or economic recessions tend to change behavior. If you look at kind of the gig economy today, a lot of that was driven by the financial crisis and people realizing you can't really depend on one stable job for your entire life. That's just one element or that drove it. And I think that the pandemic has kind of been a recession or a major disruptor of sorts for the way we work. And I think it's important, again, personal opinion, but I think it's important for us to frame it in those large trends. Otherwise, it'll just kind of be piecemeal type stuff that we do within the office or in any workplace. I'm just looking at the time here. I think we have one more minute. So I'll ask you one last quick question. If you were advising or consulting a company right now, what is something very concrete and tangible that they can do to adjust to this new reality? Because I think we've all seen surveys go out, employee feedback is nominally appreciated, but yet we're focusing on these return to office type plans, right? It's all very kind of task oriented. What do you advise clients?
I would say, begin with restoring trust. that is the overarching component that will be required to do anything else in the workplace. Employees are incredibly smart. They see through inauthentic actions by leaders. And if you really want to know what's going on with your employees, talk to them and ask them what's really going on. It's so easy to do a survey, but it's really much more difficult to engage with employees. Share your own fears as a leader and tell them what you know and what you don't know, because all of the changes that we're going to implement over the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months, we have to adopt a test and learn approach. This is just going to be a series of experiments with lots of change over the coming weeks, months, and perhaps years. So really strive for rebuilding trust and relationships, not making any assumptions about what employees want or need, and being as flexible, adaptive, and inclusive as possible.
All right. Well, sadly, I got to cut it off there. But that was great. I wish we could keep going, but I'm going to turn it over to our panel now, which I'm also moderating. So hopefully this is seamless on the tech side of things. I don't know how it's going to go. I'm just going to keep talking. All right, the panel now is for a deep dive on where we can get into kind of practical strategies on some of the topics that Louise and I just covered. And for that, we have a panel of HR and business leaders. So I'm going to introduce them pretty quickly. Reminder to everyone who's joined the panel, just remember to unmute yourself if you were muted while I was just talking to previous person. So first we have Dr. Jennifer Dimoff, forgive me if I messed that up. She's assistant professor of organizational behavior and human resource management with the Telfer School of Management. Next, we have Peter Pontone, forgive me if I messed that up. He's the vice president of human resources with Rico Digital Services at Rico Canada. Then we got Janine Spear. She's the chief people officer with Benevity. And last, we've got Nabila Ixtabalan. She's the chief operations officer with Walmart Canada. All right. So I think all of you are probably able to hear what I was doing or what I was just talking about. I'll kind of remind you what I said at the beginning there was that, it's really easy with a topic like this to devolve into kind of what I call HR speak, which is, very flowery words. But a lot of the times, people want the hard truth. And so we're here for the hard truth. So don't be afraid to kind of give hot takes or give your opinions. Perhaps what I'll do is there's a few kind of topics and we wanted to get into. And so we'll kind of pepper them throughout the conversation, but we're trying to make this as conversational as possible. Otherwise, for those watching, it can be a bit, dry and just go question to question to question. So if you want to kind of speak up and cut somebody off basically, or, jump in right after somebody's done talking, go for it. I'll try to manage it as best as possible. But we'll start off with maybe Nabila, because we had talked briefly and you kind of gave a great overview of kind of how you view this time. And I think you had talked about how there's not really a trade-off anymore between well-being and growth. So wondering if you can kind of pepper in some of your personal experience with that, because I know that it's something you've had to personally learn yourself.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tim, for the opportunity to be part of this panel. It's a really important discussion. So I started at Walmart Canada 6 months into the pandemic. And I actually struggled with anxiety for about 10 years in secret. And one of the things I reflected on when I started my new role in the middle of this pandemic was to stop pretending that, anxiety and mental health challenges don't affect all levels of leadership. So I actually introduced myself to 100,000 associates as someone who struggled with anxiety and a recovering workaholic. I really struggled with my work-life integration and balance. And I didn't know it at the time how significant that statement was going to be for the entire organization. And it started this, catalyst of conversations around mental health and well-being. And really the starting point was having a conversation as a leadership team about what do we believe to be true. We believe the mental health pandemic is going to be long lasting. And I think it was said earlier, we're just starting to see the implications of it. We believe that there's no trade-off between well-being and growth. And we believe that resilience is going to be what we all need to, survive all of the uncertainty we experience in our personal lives, professional lives, and everyday life. And so how do we build resilience? It's through increasing the well-being and the wellness of each and every individual in our organization, in our communities, and in our families. And so we believe that's what we started with, is what is that belief. And we really then started to ask ourselves, how do our strategies and our priorities align to those beliefs? And it put us on a trajectory to really rethink the role we want to play as one of the largest employers in Canada on this journey of psychological health and safety and mental wellness and mental well-being and well-being overall. It's been an amazing, I think, journey to take on in the midst of a pandemic. We've learned a lot, and we're just at the beginning.
Jennifer, I might come to you next, because a term that gets thrown around quite a lot is well-being. It came up there. And I think you had mentioned before that we're almost at this point now, at least I think according to your research, where there's a bit of almost cynicism to some extent about the importance of all this. It's kind of like, yeah, we get it. Let's move on. So wondering kind of what you're seeing, because it is this weird time where I personally feel like everyone kind of acknowledges that it's an important issue, but there's something missing. And whether it's just that managers themselves are burnt out and tired and don't want to have to, not necessarily want to have to deal with it, but they just don't have the energy to deal with it, So what are you seeing, and what are you hearing from folks?
It's really interesting. Right now, there's this kind of phenomenon where you had mentioned, a lot of HR folks have been talking about mental health, and they've been talking about these topics for more than a decade now, especially on mental health and burnout and stress in the workplace. And all of those topics have really become amplified in the last 2.5 years. So what we're seeing, though, is that there is more conversation, that there is more awareness of the importance of mental health and the consequences of mental illnesses and the intersection between mental health and the workplace. Where there's still that gap is something that Louise mentioned, is that there's this gap between awareness to action. And it's pervasive, and it's affecting HR systems, it's affecting organizational productivity, it's affecting the most important resources that organizations have, which are people and the communities in which they serve. So what I've kept coming back to with all of this is that there are these fundamental work and human characteristics that, despite the upheaval the last few years with the pandemic have brought, remain largely unchanged with the research. So people still want jobs that have, even more so than before, it's about meaning and purpose and connectivity and belonging. And we know that all those and getting to use their skills. And we see this with the talent crunch right now. People are leaving jobs because they don't feel that connection, they don't feel that belonging, but also because they don't have the opportunity to use the skills or the education that they have. And so they're looking for opportunities elsewhere that provide that meet those more fundamental human needs. And workers aren't tolerating that lack of need fulfillment now, the way that even 2.5 years ago, there was more willingness to tolerate less healthy work environments, less safe work environments. So it's been a really interesting shift. And yet the things that are fundamental to human well-being have not changed. They've just been amplified.
Yeah, someone gave me this line a number of years ago. Again, this is pre-pandemic, and it's about all facets of life. And it just summed up pretty quickly, most succinctly, is that people just want to matter, matter to an organization, matter to a loved one, But Peter, if I can kind of jump to you to build off of this, was wondering how you're approaching it, because you're in the thick of it. You're in HR, the actual department itself. And I'll preface it this way. I see it with a lot of friends. I see this with a lot of friends, even colleagues here. There's this weird dichotomy going on where it's people feel disconnected. People don't have that sense of community anymore, however you want to describe it. And yet I'll say to them, well, why don't you go into work and you can see your colleagues more, or whatever, because, a lot of offices have opened up, et cetera. there's just like a refusal. It's like, I will not, and so I feel for HR folks at this time. I feel for managers. They're trying to figure out how to address this, but yet there's these visceral responses that come out of people. So wondering what you're seeing and what you guys are doing.
Thanks for the question, Tim, and happy to be here. I think I'll start off by saying I think the pandemic has somewhat accelerated probably things we should have looked at years ago. I mean, what I mean by that is, at Rico, pre-pandemic, we were moving towards a flexible work environment, and we called it our new world of work, and we were about, I would say, 50% remote. So we were moving down a pretty good path on the hybrid, kind of model. Frankly, I think that the flexibility organizations are starting to provide team members is long overdue. So I'll say that's probably one thing, the one thing we can thank the pandemic that, it's probably something good that came out of that is it's accelerated our kind of understanding, acknowledgement, and openness to a flexible work environment. And so when we look at our, kind of return to the office planning, every time we call it return to the office, I don't like it. I change the term. We call it our new world of work 2.0, right? So what that means is, we worked with each team closely to come up with a hybrid model that worked for them. So we stayed away from a one size fits all model. We looked at individual and team needs, and we considered those. So, we basically use a lot of different forms of technology to help enable that. And what we really looked at was, what's the purpose of coming to the office? So if we're going to ask team members to come to the office and sit in a cubicle for 2-3 days a week, whatever model we think is modern and hybrid, I think we're missing the point. I think we have to come up with these meaningful moments when you're coming to the office, using things like culture magnet. What's happening that day? Are you having specific types of meetings? And again, we haven't figured it all out, but what we're starting to do is really drive the purpose of coming to the workplace. And when you look at coupling that with this hybrid model, this kind of feeling of you're going to do a little bit of everything. There's days where you're going to come in the office. There's days where you're going to work from home. There's days where you're going to work somewhere else. And so we look at what tools are available in that model. And I think communication is number one, right? So how are we communicating with our team members? We use things at Rico like pulse surveys. We do town halls. We do round tables. I'll talk a little more about mental health and well-being as well, but we really want to make sure that we're doing things that are different and more applicable to the model that is more around the hybrid work model. So we're right in it. I wouldn't say we have all the answers, but that's the approach we're taking is purpose-driven. How are we collaborating when we're coming to the office? How are we collaborating in this new reality that even if you come to the office, chances are you're going to have some folks hybrid on a call. Right. So we're kind of working through all those and coming up with answers as we move. And I think, I would encourage everybody, kind of what I think the best way to approach this is to share like we're doing today, but also keep learning. I think every day there's going to be something else that probably comes up that we can learn from each other and kind of try to get this, kind of the best way possible.
Okay. And Janine, on that front, you and I talked a bit before about the idea of kind of flexibility. And so I was wondering how you're approaching it. And for a bit of context, I think you had previously worked at Shopify, if I remember correctly, and I've got a lot of friends who work there, and they're a pretty, they kind of were, the culture was built almost in this era or for this era. And you're at kind of more of a tech type company now is the best way to put it. And so was wondering even from what you're seeing and the type of employees that you guys have got, what they're asking for and how you're viewing flexibility. Because I think you had kind of said that probably should be limits to it, or there should be kind of guardrails around it. But I'll let you explain.
Yeah, I mean, actually, what I think is true is that you have to find the model that works for you. So to your point, during my time at Shopify, I was there to help take that team fully remote. That's going to be the way that they stay. And it was absolutely the right solution for that organization and something that I felt was a really positive direction. Coming into Benevity, our focus really is on community. So we're actually quite open and comfortable with flexibility. What we've decided to do is give our employees the choice. So you can either work fully at home, you can work fully in the office, or you can mix it up if you choose. What we believe is that at the end of the day, it's the community that we're building that matters most. And so our programs and our solutions and the way we approach things need to flex to be able to integrate that new reality. And I'll give you maybe one example. There was some talk at the top of this call about how possibly things can go back in a better way in the future as we move forward. And one of the things I think a lot of us have learned is the way we were doing all company-wide town halls in the past wasn't that great for our teams. And what I mean is usually you had a speaker in a room and whoever was local got a great experience, and whoever wasn't local either missed out entirely or saw a recording after the date. And so one of the things that we do now is continue on with that virtual approach. We have a weekly connection where it's done through Zoom, where it's something that's recorded, can be watched later for other time zones. And I think ultimately, that's what it's about. So I believe in flexibility. I believe in people understanding what works for them. And I think that's one of the roles of leaders, is to be in conversation with your team, understand how they're doing, understand what tweaks might be able to be made for them to have an even more positive experience and to ultimately be able to create the best work.
Okay. And in terms of kind of
jump in, I'm going to take you up on it.
Go ahead.
To jump in, I just want to double click on the pessimism and the cynicism that is emerging around this conversation. One of the things that we've learned in this journey so far is that this is really a battle on three fronts. There's an individual accountability that exists. There's an organizational accountability that exists, and there's a societal and community accountability that exists. The stigma around mental health starts at a very young age, well before people enter the workplace. Our relationship between work, its value in our lives, and our ability to balance our achievement culture as a society with the care for our health and wellness is at odds with each other. And this is something we've actually gotten under the covers of at Walmart Canada. We have such an achievement culture, and I say that both as a organization, but also as a society, where we have glorified busyness, where we have glorified overwork, where we have glorified work at the cost of all things, to the extent that individuals can't self-identify when they're at the verge of burnout. They can't self-identify when that imbalance is in place. And if they can, they don't know what to do about it. I would be as bold enough to say that this is such a systemic issue on all three fronts that it falls in the same category as addressing systemic inequities when it comes to representation, when it comes to climate change, even. Like, there is very systemic challenges that exist in this space that I think we're just as a business community starting to understand. It took us many years to understand the work we needed to do around diversity, equity, inclusion, and accept that. It's taken us many years, and I think still, and I say this broadly as a business community, to understand the work we need to do around regeneration and being net positive, and we're still trying to do that work. And my hypothesis is that well-being and wellness is going to fall into the same category. And so I just wanted to kind of put that out on the table in this conversation, because otherwise I think we will have the same set of discussions over and over again, but this is a much bigger challenge. We've come to that realization. I've come to that realization personally as well.
Well, and to that end, it actually kind of leads directly into what I was going to ask. So it's actually perfect, because I think during the pandemic, there were a lot of wins that actually came out of it. I've heard from a lot of senior leaders being like, it was actually nice to be home with my kids in the morning. Maybe by the end of the day, you were sick of them, but the run around to school and everything wasn't happening. And what I'm noticing now is that a lot of the wins are kind of falling by the wayside. And so the one I've talked about many times is work travel. And for a personal anecdote on this front, my husband's work travel has picked up quite significantly. He's going to Grand Prix this weekend for a client event. He's going to Stampede in a few weeks' time. And a lot of the times it's client driven. And you can't really say no to the client at the end of the day. Or at least that's the mentality that has come back so quickly. And for context, we have 2 young kids, 5 and 2. So we are in the thick of it. And I'm like, whoa. Like, this is all falling back on me really quickly. And so I was wondering, in your organizations, like, have things like this come up, and what are you doing about it? I think maybe it was Eugenie who might have mentioned previously that around even executive meetings, you've created rules that only certain numbers of them are in person, et cetera.
Well, we just recently had this conversation because we immediately found ourselves, we had our first back in person board meeting, and we're like, okay, so where are we going next quarter? What city? And then we stopped ourselves and said, wait, what do we actually want to create? And do we want to get back into the old habits and the old rhythms? Or do we actually want to create something new and be a bit more intentional about when do we need to come together? Can we do that less frequently? Have better for the environment, better for our bodies, better for our families, to do that a little bit less, and then know that we've learned some great strategies and we know that we have the tools to connect remotely in a really effective way. So I think some of it is just being honest with ourselves, and something that I talk a lot about is just your internal sort of intuition about how you're feeling about something, but speaking it. So, if you're in the habit of going into the office and you realize that you need a day actually just in the quiet of your home to not have the commute, to be able to get your kids off to school, listen to that intuition, speak that intuition, and share it with your teams, particularly if you're a leader, because they need to see you set that example, and they need you to see you doing that to know that what you say about it being okay is really true.
And I'd like to jump onto that.
Yeah.
Largely because the reality of so many workers is that the traditional, that they're still going into a physical workplace. I'm thinking of Walmart and, the people working at the cash registers, the people stocking the shelves. The reality is that for them, there may not be that type of flexibility. But there are other ways of allowing people, we use the jargony term, job crafting. But it's basically making a job where the job description doesn't necessarily change, but the way that the job is done can change. So giving people that autonomy, giving people that flexibility, and like has been said multiple times already today, not going in with assumptions. So asking those questions of the people who are actually doing the job and asking them, what would make it easier for you to do your job? Or what would make it more meaningful when doing your job? What can we do as an organization to help support you in being a productive, healthy, and ideally happy, or at least fulfilled employee in whatever that role is? So it really does require being creative and having potentially challenging conversations, asking questions as a manager or as a leader you might not want to know the answer to sometimes, and recognizing that, we still have to ask those questions and still have to get creative, because sometimes the solutions the employees have themselves. And that's something we see resoundingly, like I've seen in my own research on mental health, is that employees have ideas about what the solutions are and that will actually work for the job description and for the job function. So it's being creative with whatever that is, and intentional, as Janine had mentioned, being intentional with those decisions.
Jennifer, one of the things you said that resonated with me that I think is kind of really at the forefront of what we're doing is asking really, I think a lot of people get energized by different things, right? So if you think about like the individual needs, I mean, extroverts want to be around people. That's how they get their energy, right? So they get fulfillment. We talked about fulfillment before. One of the things I've started doing, and I think it's been a good practice, is a lot of managers are in the rush and kind of from an aggressive standpoint, trying to get back together again. I want to get my teams together. I think one of the things we can start doing as leaders is asking, is this more for you or for them, right? Because your teams may not want that. And again, I think what we have to be is a little not judgmental, not forward leading on kind of when we set up a meeting. If you want to be there in person, I think what we have to be is a little more open to the fact that, hey, this is probably going to be a hybrid thing. Some will prefer not to travel and stay home. Is that okay? It should be okay. Let's challenge that and not really kind of make it seen as if you're missing out on not being there, right? And I think some of the respectful things too, like I think the way we work, if you think of a meeting room 3 years ago, there was probably whoever was remote was dialing in, and there's probably everyone dialing in from the same room, kind of side chats, chatter, laughing, people that are dialing in can't really hear. So I think we have to kind of have those protocols and understand that things are individualized. Some folks will want to get energized by talking to people and seeing people again. Others won't. Others will be prioritizing picking up their kids at 3:00 and the challenge of being, having to travel that week. So I think one of the things I'm noticing is kind of always asking, and it ties back to what I said earlier, the purpose, right? So why are you having this meeting in person? And now, if the team's asking and all the team wants to get together, I think that's a good thing, and go ahead and have it. But I think we really have to say, are they also saying that because that's what they want you to hear? So I think it's really diving into the purpose and respecting individual needs.
There's a question that came in from the audience that I can ask now, because it's also kind of on my list, which is around this idea of great resignation, talent shortage, all that kind of stuff. One thing that I will flag up front that one of my colleagues here at the Globe did a good piece on a few months back was what's been interesting is that in Canada, the Great Resignation, at least for kind of white collar office workers, didn't actually play out nearly to the same extent that it did in the US. So it kind of became this buzz term or buzz phrase everybody kind of bought into, but like the Statistics Canada data actually showed otherwise. So I kind of put that out there because it's people probably don't realize that. Another thing I will flag is that having done some writing on this subject recently, including with the RBC HR chief, what she stressed more than anything was that the real talent shortage right now, or the real talent fight, is actually at the kind of the frontline level. The service economy is reopened, and a lot of our problems, people, you think about the airports right now, people are mad at the airport situation, but when you actually dig into it, a lot of it is that they contract out a lot of the kind of security work, and the security companies can't find enough workers right now. Like it really is about talent shortage on some level. So was wondering how you're all viewing it, and maybe Nabila, you can weigh in too, because you really have a lot of the frontline workers where you are, because there's this other element to it all, which is the economy, and right now things are really hot, and you could probably on some level make an argument that there's a lot of worker power, and if the economy kind of slows or cools down, things will rebalance. So how are you viewing it? Like how are you actually trying to kind of create new benefits packages, so things of that sort, or kind of that are lasting, that will be attractive long term? Are you viewing this as kind of a short-term blip? Because, in tech, for instance, tech's already taken a hit. And so a lot of that kind of pressure on the market, a lot of air is coming out of that already.
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. So yes, we haven't seen the same impact as our partners south of us. We have 500,000 more jobs now than we did before the pandemic. We have seen a lot of individuals that maybe were previously underemployed, skilled individuals, really take advantage of this labor market and I think get more closely employed to their skill level, which is great news. We've also seen, I think, greater representation across, many diverse communities as a result of that, which is great news. I think our approach in Canada in terms of really accelerating immigration and creating faster pathways to permanent residency was also a big factor of what helped, I think, us, weather the Great Resignation. But absolutely, Tim, what you said is that, we have a shortage of frontline workers. And that is, I think, byproduct of several things. Again, individuals, I think, reconsidering their role, their relationship with work, taking the pandemic as an opportunity to kind of reskill themselves or pursue other opportunities. But we also just have, an overall labor shortage in some areas that, people are just waiting to see what will happen and what will the new kind of world of work look like, and kind of take their time to consider what their relationship with their employer is going to be. And we've been fortunate at Walmart Canada. We did a tremendous amount of hiring during the pandemic, and we've been able to relatively sustain that level of staff throughout current state. We've also not seen at Walmart Canada the Great Resignation play out in our management and salaried positions. We've actually seen the reduced turnover and increased stabilization, which we're very proud of, because we think it's a reflection of the commitment that our individuals have to our purpose, which is to help Canadians live better and save money, which is more important today than it's ever been. But the overarching labor shortage, is not going to go away. I don't think there's a near term end to it. I think, as your speaker said at the very beginning, we're just starting to see the tip of this iceberg, and I think it's going to be around for the foreseeable future.
Okay. I don't know if there's an easy answer to this question, but it's something that has fascinated me, kind of being on the outside and reporting on organizations. it might seem almost a little bit too philosophical, but the question is, how do you, at the end of the day, really implement change, particularly in a larger organization? Because an HR department might have great ideas, but it's really hard for that to kind of cut through all the different levels. So there's no right answer here, I don't think. But if any of you have thoughts on that, I'd be really open to it. My personal belief is that tone really comes from the top, and it filters its way down. But wondering what you've seen, or even things in your past that have worked that could actually be advice or helpful for folks. So if somebody wants to jump in, that'd be great. Otherwise, yeah.
One thought, Tim, and certainly look forward to hearing from others as well. But there's something that Nabila said earlier that really resonated with me, which is the realms that are at play in certain issues. So let's take mental health as the example of creating lasting change there. I think the mistake that we can sometimes make, particularly people like myself in HR roles, is we can create the solution for the moment. So we can create the solution that's like, okay, people are tired. Let's give some extra days off. That's something that we've implemented is additional days beyond vacation. We did it twice last year. We'll do it again this year. That's great. Add more money into benefits for mental health. Check. We've done that. Add additional resources for counseling, et cetera. Those things are great. And we should do them, and it's the right thing to do. But we also have to address the more systemic reasons that these things are happening. So conversations that we're in is the way that we working. So, we have now no meeting Fridays so that people can actually get into some deep work. Burnout can happen when you're just in a rhythm that isn't serving you in the work that you're doing. So having a day for people to dive in and actually solve the deep problems that they're facing has been something that we've received really positive feedback about. We're also talking a lot about meeting culture. Does everybody need to be in every meeting? How do we use asynchronous tools to record meetings and share out? How do we not engage with burnout due to time zone and be realistic about who can attend which meetings? And how do we trust each other and catch each other up? So I think beyond the solution of the moment, to create lasting change, we have to look at the system that we're in, and we have to look at really deeply examining our communication, our trust, and our ways of working, because those have to be in place to sustain the change that we're looking to make.
Yeah, Janine, I couldn't agree with you more. I think, I could say a lot of the same things. I think, and Tim, to your point, it's got to start at the top, right? So from an executive leadership team standpoint, if there's not commitment there, or there's, commitment in action, right? So I think what happens is, it makes everything kind of more collaborative and purpose-based. And I think you look at well-being. I think a lot of organizations can say they're tackled the same way. We're doing some of the same things at Rico. So we have no meeting Fridays. We have, we've increased our benefit coverage. We've started to look at it from a multi-pronged approach, and I think it's got to be continuous. And I think if you look at, for example, the no Friday meetings, you have some teamers come back and say, yeah, that's nice. There's no way I can do that. So I think that leads to what you mentioned there, Gina, around like, well, why not? Like, how are we holding our meetings? How many meetings are you in? And I think we have to just really get down and just keep diving down and not be afraid to try a little bit of everything. So it's not like the things we're doing in the moment shouldn't be done, but I think looking at it holistically and saying, okay, well, here's kind of the whole package of things we're doing from a well-being standpoint, and who are we actually reaching, and asking for feedback, right? Not being afraid to go in there, and if something doesn't work out well, or it's hitting a very low population, or you feel like it doesn't have the effect, revisiting it and kind of doing other things. So I think I think that is a very secret ingredient to what we do, is making sure we really just keep diving down and understanding kind of what the root causes are of some of these things that we're controlling. So instead of kind of, putting a band-aid and saying, hey, okay, you know what we're going to do? We're going to give you an extra day off. Well, maybe we could do things that are more systemic, that change the way we have meetings, give people actually an opportunity to go to the restroom in between meetings, and, change it so that they don't need that extra day off, right? And then when they take that extra day off, they actually go do something versus having this deep disconnect to get back to kind of their well-being standpoint. So I couldn't agree more. I think that's a very a practical way to look at things when we're talking about well-being and change.
I'm going to
go ahead, Tim.
Sorry. I got a note from Louise Taylor Green, who was the original kind of one-on-one chat, and I'm just going to read what her message said, because she was kind of answering as she listens in. So she says the top team needs to confront the brutal truth. I guess that's a bit of a tagline of the culture. And she said there's a great tool from Paula Davis, Primed Resilience Teams Inventory, that helps you analyze and implement end-to-end changes in processes, technology, and organizational systems. So I'll throw that out there. If I can give a bit of a take, again, from being on the outside, but having, my job, you get access to leaders in ways that most people normally wouldn't, right? Like, I get to sit down with CEOs and HR chiefs, et cetera. And when you sit with them one-on-one, sometimes, you're just chatting off the record before an interview begins, et cetera. And I'm always amazed, I guess you could say, at, like, they all have stuff going on too. Like I will never forget, there was, for this big piece I did last year, one of them said to me, kind of, again, off the record, it was like, I have employees kind of yelling at me or yelling at an department about whether they can expense their office chair while working from home. In the meantime, someone in her family had, there was effectively a death by suicide. And my advice was effectively, that's a very tough thing to share, but, at least amongst the top leadership team, be vulnerable, explain those things, like explain that everybody's got stuff going on. Because I find that largely corporate culture, it still doesn't let those things in, or people are kind of scared to say something sucks, or I'm really struggling. And I think it goes back to what Nabila was saying. It's like the achievement culture, right? It's like you somehow you think that if you show weakness, it's going to be a down on you. And so I often tell leaders, I'm like, go watch the Brene Brown TED Talk on vulnerability. Like it is all you need. Anyways, I think I cut you off. I don't know if you remember what you were saying.
No, but I think Dr. Jennifer was going to say something, and then I'm happy to jump in.
Perfect. Thank you. And yes, fantastic TED Talk. Yes. And read all Brene Brown's books. They're excellent. Yeah. But what I was going to say is that it's the top down, absolutely. And it starts at the top, and you have to have that endorsement from executive leaders. But most change initiatives survive or fail on the shoulders of frontline managers and mid-level managers. And they need support too, in order to implement change, in order to ensure that that change is successful. So having policies and programs and practices is essential, but they also have to be supported, endorsed, promoted by the people who are living the day-to-day, supporting the employees. So it's not just having the system, but making sure that the people working within that system have the competencies, have the tools, have the skills to be able to really function in that role, and getting those people the training that they need, and providing the autonomy to not just be a leader, but also be a manager. And in our research, we see that there's a skill gap there, that a lot of managers are either hired because of, very job specific skills that they have, where they're lacking leadership skills, or where they have the management skills, but they're not inspiring employees, or they're not providing that individualized support, or that is such a necessary component of leading people. So really ensuring that role of frontline and mid-level managers is not neglected in any type of systems change, especially when we're talking about mental health.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think if I reflect on our journey, we started with the destigmatizing, right? Leadership alignment, cultural permission starts at the top, leaders sharing their own journeys about what they're struggling with, aligning our strategies to our belief and what we want to achieve. But then the quick, it was great because conversations started happening that we never had before. But then the quick realization is managers saying, when someone tells me that they're struggling, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to help them. And the worst thing you can do is send them to a phone number to call EAP. Like, don't do that, right? So that is really, then that was step 2, is we made a commitment to train 1,000 leaders to be mental health first aid certified. Just like we would expect a leader in our business to be first aid certified in the case of a physical emergency, we expect our leaders to be mental health first aid certified so they know how to respond in a mental health crisis. We talk to them about how to identify the duck syndrome, where people are really struggling underneath the water, but because of our achievement culture and I think societal pressures and how we're just, groomed to think we have to show up at work, people are still struggle to self-identify if they need help or if they're at the verge of burnout. So how do you as a leader identify that duck syndrome, and how do you ask the right questions so that people are more comfortable saying, I'm not okay or I'm struggling? And then if that's the case, how do you help them with overload and workload management and burnout so that they can get better? And I think these are the things that our leaders very practically need help with, because our leaders are also struggling with a lot. And you mentioned it, Tim, HR leaders, frontline leaders, middle managers, everyone. And we're not trained or equipped to do all of the things that I think today we need to do in our business. And so really awareness, cultural permission at the top, education. And I have to make a plug because our partners at the Mental Health Commission of Canada are such a great resource. And we are in such a beneficial place in Canada because we have a national standard around psychological safe and healthy organizations. It is not a set of rules, it is a set of tools. It's voluntary. And I think for any organization that's starting this journey, or no matter where you are, is a great place to go.
Awesome. Okay. I just realized the time. I think we've got 5 minutes left. So probably 1 or 2 questions. If there's any audience questions you want to get in, now's your time. I've already asked a few of them. But one of them that did come in was around vacation days. And so for a bit of context here, I'm pretty sure this happened nationally, but I know it for sure happened at least the globe. Last year, no one took vacation. No one wanted to take vacation when they couldn't go anywhere. Then we had this kind of glut of vacation, sitting around and created logistical messes. I personally believe that we need a national month-long vacation so that we can all just decompress from what we have dealt with. That's obviously not going to be possible. But the question, I think somebody was just wondering kind of what are you seeing in your workplaces around people taking time, particularly in this summer? Has there been a sharp uptick or anything of that sort? Just weigh in if you've noticed any trend change.
Yeah, a couple things. I think people are starting to take a bit more time now that they can travel. I think even during pandemic, when people probably needed to take the time, they were kind of resistant to or hesitant to because they weren't able to do the things necessarily that they were hoping to do. But I just would add in that one of the other things I think that we need to be thoughtful around is this concept of longer time off. I actually think that there are scenarios that it's very appropriate to be granting longer, rest and refuel time or whatever you want to call it. And we have had a couple instances of that where we said, yeah, you know what, you actually need to go take a couple months off, or you need to take 6 months off and come back because we value you. And we're in a high growth organization. Our people are giving us a lot, and I think people that are giving it every day and then have been through this time frame just sometimes might need that additional bit of time. So in previous organizations and currently at Benevity, one of the things that we're looking at is, do we need some sort of sabbatical program or some way to allow for this to be not just sort of the one-off more serious cases, but actually something that people can think about in their planning. And when you think about systemically solving some of what we're talking about, I think that's part of it is how do you get people to consider the rhythms that they should be taking their vacation, and how do you help people in those moments when perhaps they need a bit of a longer time away to come back and be at their best.
On the sabbatical front, this is a personal opinion again, but so I've taken 2 pat leaves. One was 9 months, one was 8 months. And I tell everybody, you need to get away from work. I'll never, it's a classic thing of first time I took time away. Felt like I was leaving something behind. I emailed all of my, sources, contacts, business partners, whatever. It was like, felt like this big event. And then you do it and you realize the world moves on and you're happier and you're working a different muscle, And then the second time I did it, I didn't even email anybody. I was like, it's okay. Nobody will even notice you're gone for 4 months anyway. And it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing, You can find peace and refuel and all that kind of stuff. So take time. We are out of time, speaking of time. So I wanted to thank everybody for joining us today. Let me just make sure I don't have any concluding remarks that I have to make. Yeah, just want to say on behalf of the Globe and Mail, I want to say thank you to the Telford School of Management for making today's event possible. Thank you, of course, to the audience for listening in. And that is all. Enjoy the rest of your day.